Today is Thursday, August 7th, 2008. We're here back with Doug Parrett again. And Doug, you're going to explain to us what you're looking for when you're judging sheep. So I think I'll just kind of turn it over to you and let you take it from there.
Well, what we're going to go through here is at the State Fair, which is kind of the culmination of lots of 4-H and FFA and young people in Illinois showing their prized livestock at the fair. And many people have questions about what is a judging experience. I mean, all the animals look the same to most of the people. And what we're trying to do is identify what a judge looks at and how it really affects their life as consumers of animal protein. And so we'll start with sheep, then we're going to look at some cattle, and we're also going to look at some pigs. And livestock judging is something that's beyond just looking at animals. We're in an arena here where we have lots of 4-H youth who are competing to make the Illinois State 4-H judging team. And with that, they get to compete with youth throughout the state of Illinois, and then they're selected and get to compete in a national judging contest. But by judging, they're actually learning how to evaluate animals for economically important traits. And that typically is growth rate, which is how big and fast growing, how economically efficient they grow and produce meat. And then we're looking at muscle traits, just the pure amount of muscle, the amount of meat product. In all of our species, we're trying to get rid of fat, trying to reduce fat and waste, and so we try to that. And then animals have to be functional. You'll see them leading them around and walking them around the arena. And animals that are sound, that means walk and move correctly, are more efficient than animals that are stiff-jointed, stiff-legged, that have trouble getting to the feeder and getting around in the lots and the pens, and so they're not quite as efficient. Now, when we start here with this species of sheep, what we've got are 2 yearling ewes. And immediately when you look at them at first glance is they're pretty similar. They're about the same size. They're 2 sheep that are about the same age, so there's not a lot of difference in their just overall first glance. But to a trained judge, one of them's better and one of them's not quite as good. If you look at 2 people, if anybody would look at 2 people, you'd say, now what did they look like? And most of them would say, well, one's tall, one's short, one has a big nose or a small nose, one's stout and stocky, and one's thin. And so we use those same type of terms for animals, but we equate them to production terms. Now, when we look at these 2 ewes, the biggest difference in these ewes is here in the hind saddle, or the rear portion of these sheep. And if you look at in the leg of the sheep, you can see that there's a lot more thickness and fullness to the shape and dimension of this ewe here on the right. A lot of times a judge will actually grab them and feel if that's actually full of muscle, because a lot of times sheep are shown with wool on them. And they don't want, they'll trim them to make them look thick. But when you reach in here and grab, you'll get some sheep that actually are real well muscled. And if you look at this ewe, this is the way she typically is. She's a little flat and kind of concave in her muscle shape here. And notice how she always tends to stand kind of narrow behind. And that's her narrow stance. So we have a thick, well-muscled ewe who's got a lot of muscle development, some squareness here at her dock, some width at her top, and full of muscle in her leg. Now the other thing, they're about the same height, but Travis, if you could back her up just a little bit. And I think if you come around, Mark, you can see from a side view, that's good right there. This ewe's really long hipped. We talk from the hook or hip bone, back through her dock or back in the pin bone region. There's a tremendous amount of length of body here. And if we look at this other ewe, find her hip bone here, you can see the dimension, she's not as good. Now why that length is so important, these are the high price cuts. The leg of lamb, and then we get into the loin and the rack region. So you have a lot more dimension of muscle, a lot more product development there. So you have a little lighter muscle, shorter hipped ewe. Then you'll see a judge put his hands on them and talk about with the top. And this is where the loin chops, the lamb chops are, right down the back of the animal. So here we have a full deep loin and rack on a ewe. And here one is a little flatter, not quite the depth of muscle when you feel there. Now these are breeding ewes, but they're going to produce market animals. And so the same traits are kind of important. Now as breeding ewes though, we also want them to walk and graze in pastures and mate and breed and sustain themselves. So you can see this ewe sets down fairly square and correct on her hind leg. And this ewe will be more crooked in her hind leg and have more angle and set to her hind leg. So when she walks, she'll walk under. And she won't set up and sound. So she's not quite as sound. She's acceptable, but this is more ideal. And the other thing you like this ewe is much better as far as spring of rib. Sheep eat grass. You like a lot of capacity where they can ingest and grow and gain. And so this ewe has an advantage in capacity and soundness. And she's a heavier muscled ewe that has an advantage in dimension and muscle shape as far as the high price cuts.
Now, how did you notice that this one that you're standing next to is better for production just because of the width on the top?
Yeah. Well, the production is this, we talk about this rib and capacity, you know,
okay.
Depth of side here, rib shape, and then when you look down her top, you can see bold sprung in her rib, wide and bold sprung in her rib. And this ewe's a little narrower right there. It's just a little different because she's not bad here, but she kind of runs out of gas down her top.
Okay. Do you judge at all for wool production, or is it strictly for meat?
Most sheep breeds are judged for meat, but there are wool breeds. Now, right now, the wool breeds, like there are several breeds that are specifically wool breeds. They have longer fleeces and a less dense or a finer fleece, which is a higher quality wool. But you know, wool is not a big income product. You know, about 80% of the value in the sheep industry from sheep and lamb comes from the meat sales. And so wool now, as we've evolved with synthetics since World War II, where wool was a big item, now it's kind of a luxury item. And so most sheep are selected for their meat products, their growth and efficiency, and lesser on their wool quality, except in those wool breeds.
If we were to look at sheep that you'd be judging 50 years ago, what would have been the differences?
The biggest difference, they'd been about this size. The biggest difference, they'd been half as long and had half the growth rate. And what we've done in sheep is make them from little sheep to big sheep. And sheep consumption has gone down in the last 50 years. Now, the reason for that, there's lots of reasons for that. Sheep are low maintenance, they eat grass, and they're pretty easy to raise and grow. A lot of 4-H youth have sheep projects because they're just easy. You can see these young guys that are students at Illinois. It's easy to be around sheep. So a young 4-H'er can get involved with them pretty well. But they have, for the size that they are, there's not a lot of meat. You get about half of the weight of an animal, market sheep animal, in saleable meat product. So when you think about the cost of harvest and the amount of product you get, the return isn't very big. So, and so we have less consumption, the price goes up, and it's been a vicious cycle of people eating less, it becomes higher price, they're producing less, and it's just become more of a delicacy than a lot of consumption.
In terms of the efficiency, sheep, hogs, cattle, how would you rate them?
We usually, on an average daily gain basis, cattle are 3 to 4, sheep are 2.5 usually, and sheep are about a pound a day. Now, the advantage in the place of sheep is they eat grass. And we raise sheep environments, the western rangelands, the mountain lands, where there's hardly enough grass or feed to support cattle, but sheep are still a viable alternative. The sheep industry has shrunk quite a bit, and so they become our minor species as far as meat production. Most of the consumption now is by different ethnic groups in large cities where sheep and lamb have been a big part of their diet.
Okay, thank you very much, Doug.
Okay. Excellent.
Well, Doug, obviously we're checking on a different animal here. Tell us a little bit what we're looking at.
Well, probably nothing goes through more changes than the swine industry has. And We've got a couple of market hogs here. They're both crossbred market hogs, and that means we've taken a couple of different breeds and mated them together to try to make a more perfect or more ideal market animal. Now, when we look at the market animals, again, it's how much consumer product or amount of muscle and amount of meat, and can we produce it lean? Now, remember, pigs are harvested when they're 5 to 6 months old at a weight of somewhere 260 to 280, 285 pounds. And so we're worried about how pigs grow, how fast they gain, and how much lean product they produce. Now, if we watch these two pigs going around the ring, it's really important to watch them walk away from you. And if you look at the pig in the far corner, you'll see a pig that's pretty big framed, pretty long-sided, gained real well. But we'll circle a little, but look at, now let's switch to this other pig right. Look how tremendously thick that pig is. Look through the center of the ham versus the width of the pig on the left. And it's a pretty dramatic difference. And that automatically, from a market standpoint, a judge would say, well, they're both really nice, they're both good barrels, but I want this pig that's really got the most amount of meat to be desirable. So we describe a pig here, he's kind of a moderate-sized pig, but he's got a tremendous amount of width and shape to his top, and real muscular behind. This pig on the left here, we want him big frame and growthy. And they're both fairly lean, but you can see he's a little plain. And by plain, I mean he's kind of smooth in appearance, but he's not defined by leanness. He's not defined by lots of muscle. This barrel right here, you can see the creases of muscle in his ham, and up through his rump and top, almost a butterfly shape. That means a real bold, deep, expressive shape of muscle in his top. If we drive in a pig that's small and short and fat, they would be discounted pretty hard. If we drive in a pig that's real tall and lean, but without muscle, they'd be discounted. So both these pigs are acceptable, but you've got a pig coming around on this side that's got a huge muscling advantage. Now, we've changed the type of pigs. Mark, you and I were visiting earlier about the generation cycle in pigs. And, you know, once pigs get into production at a year of age, they can have a litter of pigs about every 3 to 5 months. You know, actually 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days is gestation length in pigs. And, you know, so a couple times a year, they can start having pigs. And a sow will lay down and have a litter of pigs. So she'll have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pigs in a litter. So you have selection within a litter. You can have multiple litters or farrowings every year, so the change in types of pigs happens really rapidly.
And what kind of changes have we seen over the last 50 years?
Well, we all can think about the image of the pig in the 50s we called the lard type pig. Pigs that grew and were real deep and just really full of fat. Then we as a society, and rightfully so, decided we need leaner meat products. And so we went to extremes and started selecting for extreme leanness and great big frame pigs. You can see a pig here on the left that's bigger frame. When we got those big pigs that were really lean, they didn't do very well in a confinement hog house. They just didn't grow or gain very fast. They were restrictive in their body capacity and maybe not sound on their feet and legs. You know, a confinement hog house, if anybody comes to the fair, they're going to walk around on asphalt and concrete, and their knees are going to hurt and they're going to get tired. Well, we raise pigs in confinement all the time too. And so what we're trying to do is find pigs that are sound, wide body, grow and gain efficiently with extra amounts of muscle and still lean. And it's hard to get a pig that's really good in those categories. This pig right here is really good in a lot of categories. Most guys, I mean, here's a pig that would be real competitive with fair if it's just a notch bigger frame. He's a little bit moderate size, but he's tremendously wide, tremendously muscular, and that's really important and real sound.
So would it be fair to say that the changing taste of American consumers is what's been driving the evolution of the hog?
Two things typically drive changes in our meat animal species. One is economy of production. What type of animal can we produce the most efficiently, the most pounds of product? And the second thing that changes the type of animals is what's the consumer want? And the consumer wants lean products with just a lot of lean protein.
And is it important to be able to watch the animals move around when you're judging?
Yeah, it goes back to function and efficiency. I mean, here's a barrel that's really sound on his feet and legs, you know, just easy tracking. Just gets around the ring with no shortness of stride, no stiffness or tightness. You think about raising animals in big groups, and they walk into the feeder, how they get along in a big environment. Those that are sound always get up, go eat, and walk around and just function very well. If you're stiff jointed, you slip and fall and can't function well, you're always straining in life, and so your efficiency go down. So soundness is one of those basic ingredients to a real efficient animal.
How old are these animals?
These animals will all be about 6 months old.
Does that mean they're ready for market right
They
now?
are ready today. They're ready to go. They're at ideal market weights. They're a little on the heavy end, but they're just ready to go. Great pork chops right here in front of you.
Typically, the kinds of animals that you see at fairs, are they for breeding purposes, or are they going to end up in the market?
Two categories. I mean, separate categories. You'll have breeding animals. We looked at breeding sheep earlier, and then market animals. So half the show animals are here strictly for market purposes. Half of them will be returned back to the different breeding environments to produce them. But they all, breeding animals, besides soundness and fertility and things, they all are trying to raise these ideal market animals.
Anything else we need to know about these
No,
guys?
but let's go look at some cattle.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
Okay.
Doug, what breed are we looking at here?
Well, we moved over to the cattle side of the arena, and we're got a couple of crossbred steers here. And we've used the term crossbreeding a lot when we talked about our different species. And in mating, we have purebred lines of cattle, pigs, and sheep. And each breed excels for certain traits. Maybe they're a better reproductive breed, maybe they're a better muscle breed, meat quality might be higher, different kinds of traits. So we crossbreed to try to put breeds together to make a more ideal animal. And so we see a lot of crossbreeding. It's just a more efficient way to raise a lot of these cattle. So they're both black, but they might have different base genetics because the black color from Angus tends to dominate any kind of red or white color through there. So you'll have black animals that might actually come from a couple of different types of breeds of cattle. So these are market weight steers. And like we've been talking about with all the species, you'll get different sizes and shapes. Here we have a moderate frame steer that's kind of big bodied and
So one on the left of the camera?
On the left here we have a moderate frame steer. We can actually look at, he's got some muscle in his quarter, he's pretty broad in his top, and he's got a lot of capacity or spring rip. And we use that term capacity. It's not a food term, but it means an animal can, the sisters that are in production or animal, these can kind of grow and gain real well. And so we have a moderate size, heavy muscle, big bodied steer, we'd say. And then we got a different body type here. We have a steer that you ought to be able to see. He's a little taller. He's a longer bodied steer, and he's a steer that's leaner. And if we just go in and we'd handle him, steer, you can see he's a little less finish over his ribs. So he's a leaner animal that's got more frame and got more length. And here's a steer that's probably a little fatter. You put your hands on them and see how they finish. For people about, this is where the rib eyes and the loins and the steaks are, and these are the big round steaks. And it's here. So we got a leaner, longer bodied steer, a little thicker, wider base steer with a little more capacity.
And I'm assuming that the one on your right is the one that you say is the superior animal?
Well, I don't know if superior so much. This one would be more market ready today. And that's one of the things that people with their show cattle always have faith. The fair is held this week, and it's hard to get these animals that are 15, 16, 17 months old to get them just right for the fair. And as a judge, what he's going to say is these are both good. He's going to say these are both desirable animals, really sound, really long pattern. From a quality standpoint, as far as quality grade of meat, he's going to be leaner, but maybe not have as much marbling, which would get him to a higher quality grade. Actually, just leave him staggered back, just like that. And so this one's probably more market ready from a quality grade standpoint. Now, that's a little different than we've talked in the other species. Cattle are fed so they have a little more fat on them when they're harvested than pigs or sheep. Pigs or sheep, we like to send them when they're really lean. But steaks and beef are kind of based on a market product that has a little bit of fat to it. And that adds that flavor, that choice flavor and that prime flavor. And the American public is determined, we pay more for beef, but when we eat steaks and roast, we want them to have a little extra juiciness and flavor. So we, at market time, like them to have a little more fat on them, but we never want them over fat. Now we have an animal that's maybe a little leaner, which is still pretty acceptable because we're going to have a lot of lean cuts. Our yield from this animal is going to be really good. Quality grade will be a little better here. I suspect the judge, if these two ended up in the same class, would say, I like a more moderate steer that's a little more market ready and finished, maybe a little more shape and quarter. At some judges, they'd say, oh, I like these lean, long-bodied steers that are really lean in their shape, they're really long-hipped and good-legged. But I would probably put the two together to make an ideal market animal. You'd get a steer that's probably just a little more finished and one that's just a little longer and a little leaner. And then one of these two might be ideal. There might be a more ideal one out there. Who knows? We'll find out in the judging on Saturday.
50 years ago, what kind of an animal would you be looking at?
Same transition we've talked about. We used, in the 50s, cattle went to market at 30 months of age, weighing 900 pounds. And now we have steers that are weighing almost 1,400 pounds at 12, 13, 14 months of age. So we've reduced the growth. So we've increased gain and efficiency enormously. 30, 40, 50 years ago, the market cattle were an inch fat, and you would cut that off. And now we get cattle, ideal fat is about 3/10 or 4/10 of an inch of fat. And we've done it, though, retaining the marbling or the flavor in the meat. So we genetically doubled the rate of growth, and we've sustained our quality grade, and so we think efficiency and quality has really been improved.
Now, I remember in a previous discussion we had, you talked about how the animals were a lot taller, and then you decided there was disadvantages to that.
If you look at some pictures and happen to see Doug Parrett judging, you would see cattle that I couldn't see over. And what we did in these cycles, when you change cattle type, it takes 4 or 5 years to really change them. In the cycle of judging and selection, sometimes we go to extremes. And to get out of these real little small fat ones of the 50s and 60s, we went to these giants in the early 70s and through the 80s, and they weren't practical to raise. They didn't grow fast enough, the meat quality wasn't very good, producers couldn't maintain elephant-sized cows. So now we moderate out. These steers would be as big as we want them, their growth is fast, and they've ended up at a real good market weight.
I noticed that the handlers here keep repositioning the feet. So what's going on with that?
Well, they're trying to impress the judge. They want their animal to look the best it can. And you can see, they want them to stand wide behind, so they give the appearance of all the muscle they've got. And then you'll see they get a hind leg back. This animal's real well trained. Hind leg's back, so from the side it looks really long-bodied. They hold the head up because it gives a balanced appearance. And you can see them scratching their bellies and underside. That's kind of like petting a dog. That just keeps them kind of quiet and kind of calm, and you can see they're both really well behaved.
With all the evolution of the cattle that you've had over the decades, has breeding and calving changed as well?
Yeah, it's always, the purebred breeders are using a lot of performance records. We have performance records and measurings of growth rate, carcass characteristics, the efficiency of growth. So we measure all these characteristics so our breeders have actual objective performance data. And then we hope we change the animal types to have a functional animal that yields the right meat product. So we can't ever let market type get out of balance that it's hard to produce it. And we can't ever emphasize just production traits that don't give us a market trait. So we've heard phrases, the eye of the master, or the balanced traits, and all those kinds. You have to keep everything in balance, or Mother Nature will say, that doesn't work, and then you lose all efficiency.
Would it be right to say, though, that come calving time, human beings have gotten involved much more than they used to?
No, I don't think so. They would be involved only because they're around and they're available. Calving traits, if you're using bulls on cows where they have trouble giving birth, you better switch bulls. And almost all breeders of cattle select for moderate to low birth weights, no calving problems. Now, as we make them bigger and more muscle, you're challenging Mother Nature. You're trying to say, if you make them big at some point in their life, they usually start bigger. So there's always checks and balances. I want to have them big and growthy, but I don't want them to start too big, and that takes years of selection to get that combination.
And how would judging livestock, like we've looked at today, differ from judging horses?
All of the livestock we've looked at are food animal species, an animal protein meat species. And so everything we do here comes back to quantity of animal protein, quality of animal protein, and a functional shape in the environment they're in. Now horses, you know, the goal of the horse is possibly a pleasurable ride, or pulling a cart or a wagon or something like that. So they have to be sound, they have to be very functional on their feet and legs, but it's almost more of an art form. The balance, the look, there are some traits and characteristics that aren't necessarily related to an economical meat production form, but are more the species has evolved into almost an art form versus food production.
Last question for you, Doug. You've been judging livestock for almost your entire life. Why do you love it so much?
Well, you have a passion for livestock. I mean, because, you know, animals, perfection, the target's out there for high quality, efficient production. So there's some reality to it. But you can look at these young people and the other ones we've seen and worked with this morning. I mean, that's the passion for all this. As an educator, you're in the classroom, but this gets you out with young people that have desire to be involved in agriculture, and there's nothing more reinvigorating or nothing that sustains you more than seeing young people and their goals and how bright their future is and just trying to be part of it.
Well, again, Doug, thanks very much for allowing me to be your student. I've learned an awful lot over these last couple weeks, and I've really enjoyed it.
Well, it's been a good story. We're glad to share. Thanks.